Hey folks, so today I'm going to start actually putting the transmission back together. Um, you can see I cleaned out the bottom there a little bit from my last video. It's not perfect. There is a second drain plug directly under this area. So there's two drain plugs to the transmission. One kind of under your differential and then one here. Or actually the other one is under your bowl gears. So when you change or drain the transmission fluid, make sure you open up both, because within here was a good, I'd say more than a quart of fluid. That was real nasty stuff. So you want to make sure you drain both locations. After I drained that milkshaky stuff out of there, I put the plug back in. I poured some diesel in. Took my hand down there, splashed around to try and clean it up. Probably the first time I go and run this, I'm just going to throw some diesel or gas in there. Now, go ahead and say that's crazy. That's what the manual says to do, and I have done it before. You don't run it very long, just enough to stir things up and clean things up, and then immediately drain it and put oil in it. So we'll do that whenever we go and run this for the first time. That bearing on the inside there, it cleaned up, same thing. It still looks dirty, but any surface rust just came off. All the rollers look good, so I have no doubts about that. And then over here, I went ahead and cleaned up everything for the counter shaft, brushed everything off. I did find, something like here, the gear teeth have a little bit of wear on them, maybe from shifting. I'd say the teeth were just starting to get some surface rust and pitting. I think they're okay to use, but again, to the point in my last video, this is why it's very important to change the transmission fluid, because that water in there will start to rust your gears, even if there's oil elsewhere in it. So yeah, we're gonna get this counter shaft in first. Here's these bearings. Now I remember on my B, finding these bearings, or the equivalent for my B, was very difficult to find. New ones, for some reason, the replacement, they were very expensive. Something tells me they were close to like $100 a piece or something like that. I don't know, but anyway, if you can, save these, protect these. And again, these are at towards the very bottom, so they're most susceptible to the rust. If you ever want to disassemble this, what you actually do is, with the first gear on here, so slide the gear on, and in a press, you want to, I forget which way this goes, but whichever way it is, set it on the gear, and you want to press this bearing off using that gear. Do not press on this. This is a cast washer, at least that's what it was on my B, and you put any pressure on it and it will snap. And I don't know that you can get a new one of those. So yeah, just talking from experience on that. So we'll get this in there, kind of the opposite of the way it came out. We'll lay the gears out in the transmission and start feeding the shaft through one at a time. Okay, so real quick, before I installed this outer bearing race, I think I mentioned before that there was a metal shim on here. I didn't realize it, but also on the side of the crankcase there were two paper shims, and I got a little chuckle out of this. I would say that one was not from John Deere, so it'd be my guess that somebody had this apart at some point, which would further validate my theory that with those gear teeth remnants in the back, if they were significant enough that it's just not what I'm seeing, then it may have been fixed before. So I made two new gaskets here. and we'll get this on. Okay, so we got the counter shaft in, as you can see there. Okay, this is future Daniel here talking to you when I was getting this back together. Just as I told you not to screw these threads up, I did that myself. See, when you push this shaft through, it wants to drop down once the shaft gets past this bearing and such, and then it drops on those threads. So whatever you do, find a way to put a sleeve or something around this to protect those threads. I'm going to have to get a large die. I only have up to a 1-inch die, and I think it's 1 1/8 inch. Yeah, just be very, very careful with this. This is twice I've done this on different tractors, and I'm definitely never going to make this mistake again. So I'm going to take the risk and go ahead and keep assembling. I think I'll be able to just re-tap it from here, especially when I take this washer off. I can get a tap on there. So next we'll get the sliding shaft in here. So there's this piece here. You'll need to stick through that bearing over there. And then these gears, they can already be on. We'll slide that in through this side, I believe. Yeah. And once that's all together, we'll put the snap ring back in here. All right, so this shaft is in now. I may have misspoken in the last clip, but you put the first reduction gear shaft in first, then just the bare shaft. You start to put through over here with the bearing on the end, and slowly, one at a time, feed your gears on as you put the shaft through. Feed on the end with your rubber hammer. Then the hardest part is getting that snap ring in. Just use a screwdriver, start on one end, and keep leveraging the rest of it in. So before I put this first sliding gear shaft in, this is the one out of the high-low shaft. This is your detent. That want to check these out when you pull them out. Make sure that they aren't broken or rusty or anything like that. So this one came out of right here. When I took my B apart, there was one that was in really bad shape. So this had just a little bit of surface rust on it, so cleaned it up. And there I go, dropping it. So it's those detents in that spring that sit within these grooves, and that's what locks, so to speak, you in gear. And if you know something is jumping out of gear, you may not have good detents, and as in the piece that I just dropped here that was in this spring, or maybe your gears slipping, but odds are it has something to do with this. So just something to pay attention to when you take it apart and put it back together. So we'll start the shafts one at a time and move our way backwards. Okay, so I got all 3 shafts in. A couple things to note. The hardest thing really about putting this middle shaft in and these shifter forks was getting the wire out after I had it in there. So this center shaft here, it has a flat spot. You can see it there. Now that is where this set screw rests against that to hold that clocking orientation. That's very important because you obviously want those detents to find their little grooves. So make sure you've got that oriented right with the flat up in order for this to sit against it. I went ahead and threw some anti-seize in these, but honestly there was some oil and stuff in them, so it's low risk. And the threads on them are so short that I don't think they actually get that tight. But anyways, got a little messy there. But the safety wire for the set screw underneath this. Like I said, when I was getting it out, putting this in, I actually shifted this over, and you were able to rotate this backwards in order to get that set screw up top so you can see the hole, put it in, start your safety wire, and then flip it up and get it into this position. Make sure this is tight up underneath because you don't want that gear to find it. You don't want to get that wire in your system, and at the same time that safety wire is there for a reason. That set screw comes out, yeah, it could be a mess from there. And then on this middle shaft also, don't forget there is, see if I can do it without walking over there. Yeah, there it is. This screw on the end there. So don't forget to put that in. So moving on, we've just got the gear system out here. Alright, now on this side of the tractor, we got to get this piece back on. I cleaned it up because it was pretty nasty. If you remember, this bearing and everything in here was pretty dirty. So it cleaned up well though. So I've got a new gasket here to put on it. Don't block this channel here if you put a new gasket on, because that's where oil feeds into this bearing that's thrown up by the transmission. So make sure, you can see like in the gasket I created, I've got that groove in there. You really only needed at the end a hole for it to follow, but I went ahead and cut out the whole groove. So we'll get this on, and then we're going to get our safety wire back on each of these four. I believe those four, these two down here, and then safety wire was wrapped from this bolt head here around that one. And then we should be done with this side. One thing to note on the letter series, any interfaces with the transmission, for example, these covers down here, you want to use, you need to make sure you use a gasket and or gasket maker on it, because this area, although it is the first reduction gear, it actually gets oil from the engine. Now, that's only applicable to the letter series, starting with, I believe, the 10 series, like, 50, 60, 70, and so on. They started getting oil from the transmission. So different story there. But for these, they get oil, I think, from the pulley here and the slinger, and it feeds onto the first reduction gear. That's why when you put all this back together, and I'll mention this later, you actually put a quart of oil or so in the belly of your first reduction gear here, so that gets oil from the get-go. But it's just kind of a splash feed onto that. So just something to note on that. It is key to not have leaks in this area. Otherwise, you will get transmission fluid in here and or engine oil in there. All right, so I'm going to end this video here with this. Obviously, I'm recording this on a different day, but excited the flywheel here. Fun fact, you can't take this off without removing the flywheel. But anyway, there's supposed to be an oil retainer back here, like a, I don't know, we'll call it a thin metal cup that's tight fitting around there. It wasn't there when I took this apart. Probably just gonna see when I order a bunch of parts if anyone has one, so I can put that on. But anyway, then lastly, you have your outer gear. Then your shifter fork has this set screw that goes in a hole on this underside here. So you'll have to kind of put this all in at the same time. And wire tie that set screw, of course. And I think that's it. And I got to put the cotter key in down there yet for that one. But we would put the gear cover on and move on with this. So Appreciate you guys viewing this video. Got any helpful hints or suggestions or anything I can do, any questions, you just let me know. Have a good day.